I returned home for Thanksgiving, apron already tied around my waist, and casually asked my daughter, "Did you remember to bring the ginger paste from my pantry?" She looked at me, hesitated. "Grandma already had some," she said softly, eyes flicking toward the dining room. My hands paused mid-stir. "From where?" I asked. She leaned closer, whispering the words that would gut me in a single breath. "They're taking your recipes." I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I just turned off the stove and followed her. We walked past the hallway where my mother's laughter echoed too brightly, where the smell of roast turkey didn't quite mask the undercurrent of something stolen. My daughter Ellie led me to the back room, once a sewing nook, now forgotten storage. A dented metal shelf stood crooked against the wall, where I'd stored my handwritten notebooks for decades. Pages brittle with grease, corners curled from steam and time. They weren't there, or rather, half of them weren't. The bottom shelf had always held the red-bound ones. Holiday sweets, weeknight favorites, Grandpa's chili variations. Now only soups for flu season, and everything pickled remained. The rest gone. I didn't cry. My daughter looked at me, expecting something. Anger, maybe. I simply sat on the nearby stool and waited. Waited to feel anything besides this slow, deep hollow. I'd spent 27 years collecting those recipes. Not off the internet. Not from television shows. Real food, real time, burnt fingers, ruined pots, breakthroughs on the third try. I created things no one else bothered to. When I moved to the States in 2096, I had nothing but my suitcase and those notebooks. I taught myself the difference between corn syrup and golden syrup, swapped jaggery for brown sugar. I failed, then I adapted. I fed neighbors, potlucks, bake sales, and over time, my kitchen became the room where people lingered longest. I shared my food, never my pages. Not even with my sister Rachel, who always joked she'd open a cafe with my cooking if she could. Apparently, she wasn't joking. Ellie sat beside me now, chewing the inside of her cheek. "I saw them printed out," she murmured. "In Aunt Rachel's bag, laminated." She said she was trying out ideas for a brunch spot. My fingers tightened around my knee. Laminated. That meant planned, packaged, prepared to be sold. "I didn't know if I should tell you," Ellie said. But then at dinner, she said the apple chutney reminded her of Grandma's recipe. I wanted to scream, "It's yours, Mom. It's all yours." I didn't answer. Instead, I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out toward the backyard where folding chairs dotted the grass. Rachel was out there now, laughing with two of her friends, holding a wine glass like she owned the place. My parents sat nearby, nodding along. Of course they wouldn't see the theft. Not when it was dressed in compliments and promises of putting the family's legacy on the map. I'd been invisible for years anyway. Back when Ellie was 5, she had a fever so high we had to drive through a snowstorm to get to the ER. I remember calling Rachel from the hospital parking lot. She didn't pick up. Later she said, "I figured you had it handled. You always do." That was the story of my life, showing up, fixing things, never needing help. I ran the PTA bake sale, catered every birthday, stayed up to prep the Thanksgiving turkey because you're so good at it. But no one asked where the recipes came from. No one offered to write them down. They assumed they'd always be there, like plumbing, like hot water. Now, they were being lifted, passed off as someone else's. Ellie placed something in my hand, a page, yellowed at the edges, torn from one of my books. "I saved this one," she whispered. "Pumpkin halwa with the browned butter." I saw it in Aunt Rachel's printouts. She called it spiced squash pudding, like she made it up. My jaw clenched. That dish was my father's favorite. I made it for his last birthday before his stroke. Rachel didn't even show up that year. Said flights were too expensive. And now? She was putting it on a menu. I tucked the page into my pocket, walked back to the kitchen, and began to scrub the countertop slowly, methodically. Not because it needed cleaning, but because I needed to feel grounded, in control. My mother walked in, chatting about the cranberry sauce. I didn't look up. "Did you know Rachel's using my recipes?" I asked. Silence. Then, "Oh, don't be dramatic. Recipes are for sharing." I turned to face her. Not when they come from someone's life. Not when they're claimed without a name. She sighed, annoyed. "It's just food." And that's when I knew she never saw me. Not really. Not the long nights I spent adjusting spice levels for American palates. Not the calluses from rolling dough. To her, I was just the person who made the house smell nice. That night, I took Ellie's hand. "Can you show me all the pages she has?" I asked. She nodded, quiet, steady. She was the only one who saw me. Ellie pulled out a slim blue folder from her backpack, the kind students use for last-minute essays. Inside, plastic sleeves held photocopies, some grainy, some sharpened and clean of my handwriting. My loops, my corrections in the margins, my oil stains captured in black and white. She laid them out on the bed in the guest room while I sat at the edge, spine rigid, hands folded like I was praying. There were 18 pages, 18 recipes, some of which I hadn't cooked in years. She must have taken photos from the shelf before last Christmas, Ellie said. I remember they disappeared around then. You thought you packed them away. I nodded slowly. I had thought that. I'd assumed the notebooks had been misplaced during the kitchen renovation when everything had been boxed and shuffled. But no. Rachel had waited until I was distracted, planning, cooking, caring, and plucked them like heirlooms she believed were hers by right. The butter chicken with burnt cinnamon, my husband's favorite, was in there. The ginger cardamom shortbread I'd developed during my first year working night shifts, trying to sell baked goods on weekends to make ends meet there. Even the mung bean stew I made after Ellie had chicken pox. I'd adjusted the spices so she could eat without crying, and that version, the low heat, extra turmeric, rice blended in, was titled, For Ellie, Sick Days. And Rachel had laminated it. I stared at the plastic sheen like it was a gravestone. She called it Healing Lentil Bowl on the sample menu, Ellie said. She's giving interviews already. Talks about how the recipes were passed down from strong women in the family. I scoffed. Passed down from where? I'd written every page by hand. No one passed me anything but bills and responsibility. I thought back to 1998, a winter in Chicago, so brutal the pipes froze twice. Ellie was still a toddler, her cheeks always pink from the cold. I used to wake up at 4:30 a.m., knead dough while the radiator clicked to life, wrap her in a shawl, and walk her to the sitters before heading to the diner. I'd pack leftovers in tin boxes, flatbread still warm, yogurt with a pinch of cumin. I kept track of every ingredient not to save money, but to understand flavor. It was my form of control in a life I had little say over. My marriage had already started to fray by then, my husband halfway present, always one foot out the door. But food that stayed, that was mine. I never shared my recipes, not fully. People asked, of course. At church potlucks, someone always wanted to know, what's in this? Or, how do you get the rice so fluffy? I'd smile, nod politely, and say, just love. Rachel used to roll her eyes at that. She was always louder, always charming, the one who showed up late and left early, arms full of praise and none of the cleanup. Yet here she was, marketing my silence as a family treasure. Oh, when I was growing up in Gujarat, my mother had one recipe notebook. Cloth-bound, frayed at the corners. I wasn't allowed to touch it. She'd slap my hand away and say, You earn these pages with time. I used to think she was cruel, withholding, but now I understand. Those pages were her story, her battles, her victories in a world that rarely gave women ownership over anything. Recipes were proof we existed. And now someone had stolen mine. That night, after everyone left and the dishes were stacked half clean in the sink, I sat at the dining table and opened my laptop. It felt wrong, almost cowardly, to digitize something that had always lived in my hands. But I began scanning. Not just the 18 Rachel had copied, but the rest, everything I still had. Ellie helped, fetching the old notebooks from the locked chest in my closet, each one wrapped in dish towels like porcelain. I labeled each recipe with dates, notes, origin stories. The puri dough I'd finally perfected after 8 failed attempts. The mango pickle I made only once a year, because the brining required exact humidity and timing. The cookies Ellie had once sold at her school fundraiser, which won first prize but were labeled store-bought by another parent because they were too professional. By midnight, I had scanned 112 recipes. At 2 a.m., I uploaded them to a secure drive, password protected, shared only with Ellie. No one gets these without my name, I said. She nodded. Mom, she said softly, you should do something with them. For real, not to sell, but so they're yours forever. I didn't answer. Not yet. The sting was still fresh. The betrayal still pulsing under my skin like a fever. But something shifted when I saw her holding those pages with reverence. Like history. Like memory. Rachel's betrayal wasn't just about food. It was about erasure. About pretending I never existed in the work she was now parading as her own. And the worst part, my parents didn't care. When I asked my father earlier that day if he knew about Rachel's plans, he looked genuinely confused. She said you'd given your blessing, he said, that you were proud. Proud. As if I should be honored, my work was being stolen for brunch specials. I thought of the years I spent saving for Ellie's tuition. The extra shifts, the skipped vacations, the shoes I wore until the soles cracked. I thought of every time Rachel told me to relax, or stop being so intense about my cooking, as if it were a hobby, not a survival. And now she'd turned my survival into her brand. I looked at Ellie, who was now fast asleep on the couch, curled under a faded quilt. Her laptop still open beside her, one recipe half scanned. I reached over, closed it gently, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Then I turned off the kitchen lights, one by one, and went upstairs. Tomorrow, I'd decide what came next. But tonight, I'd rest. I'd earned that much. By the time I woke up, sunlight had already warmed the edges of the windowsill, and Ellie was gone. A note sat on the kitchen counter, written in her neat print. Went to class. Don't worry, I locked the file. Text me if you need help with anything. I poured coffee into the chipped mug. I always used light green, handle cracked but holding. As I sipped, I stared at the folder on the table, the one where we'd placed the remaining physical recipes. Something inside me had settled overnight, but not in a peaceful way. More like sediment at the bottom of a shaken bottle. Heavy, unmoving, waiting. I opened my phone and searched for Rachel's Cafe. There it was, Saffron Sisters. The tagline read, "Celebrating generations of flavor passed down through strong women." I clicked on the menu preview. Auntie's spiced butternut soup, heritage cardamom shortbread, healing lentil bowl. No mention of my name or even hers. Everything was wrapped in vague nostalgia. A theft draped in sentiment. I scrolled further and found an interview on the local food blog. In it, Rachel smiled at the camera, arms crossed confidently, and said, "These recipes are about family. They come from all of us." I grew up watching amazing women cook without ever needing credit. I stared at that line, rereading it twice. Without needing credit, I shut the phone down, heart slow but burning. This wasn't just oversight, it was intentional. She'd framed my silence as complicity, my absence as agreement. But the worst part came when I dug a little deeper. Someone had shared photos from the launch event. In the background, behind the samples and flower arrangements, was my notebook. The original red-bound one, sitting on a display stand, open to the Diwali Laddu page. My handwriting, unmistakable. She'd used it as decor. I felt sick. I stood, walked to the sink, and ran cold water over my wrists. That notebook was supposed to be mine to pass down, not something to be paraded around like a rustic prop. It was like watching a loved one's gravestone used as a centerpiece. Ellie called at noon. "I just got a message from someone at school," she said. Their mom went to Rachel's place and sent her the picture of the notebook. She said, "This is your mom's, right?" I remember those pages from church events. I sat down slowly. People are starting to notice? Some are. Not loudly, but yeah, it's spreading. Her voice was quiet. "Do you want me to do anything?" "Not yet," I said. "Just save that photo." That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled the boxes of recipes out again. I wasn't ready to fight, not in public, not yet, but I needed to know exactly what she'd taken, so I made a list, cross-referenced her menu with my archives, checked timestamps on the photos we'd scanned, labeled every entry. Then I found something else, a file from 6 months ago, emailed to me by accident. It was from my cousin Priya, who worked in branding. Subject line, "Mock-ups for Rachel, Heritage Series." I had ignored it at the time, assuming it was family spam. I opened it now. Inside were graphics, social media layouts, even merchandise tags, each with stylized quotes, blurred versions of things I'd written in the margins of my notebooks. Cook with your whole self. A pinch of memory in every spoon. Words I wrote late at night, alone, never meant for public eyes. They'd lifted my voice, smoothed it out, and printed it next to images of spice jars and chai cups. I sat in the dark for a long time, laptop open, screen cold. I thought of the first time I made Ellie scrambled eggs. She was 2, fussy. I didn't want her to think food was just sustenance, it had to feel like care. I shaped the eggs into a smiling face using ketchup. She giggled so loudly she woke my husband, who walked in bleary-eyed and said, "You're too soft on her." I didn't answer. I was already carving out a different kind of motherhood, one with flavor and softness and rituals no one saw. And now Rachel had carved it out of me. By morning, I'd made a decision. I texted Ellie. "I need your help this weekend. We're going to the cafe." She replied instantly. "Whatever you need." I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to storm in. I was going to sit, order, eat the food they said was ours. And then I would do the one thing they never expected I would ask. Who wrote it, out loud, in public? With a quiet, cutting kind of clarity that couldn't be deleted. I'd let them speak for years. It was my turn now. Saturday came with a flat gray sky, the kind that presses down on your shoulders. I dressed plainly navy cardigan, black flats, hair pulled back, nothing theatrical, nothing that might signal confrontation. Ellie wore a muted sweater, her expression steady, phone tucked in her pocket like a shield. We parked a block away from the cafe. "You sure?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to listen." Saffron Sisters sat on a gentrified stretch of Main Street, nestled between a boutique soap store and a yoga studio with reclaimed wood signs. The windows were fogged from the heat inside, condensation trailing like ghosts. We pushed through the glass door and the scent hit me first. Coriander, hing, sweetened condensed milk warming on a back burner. It should have smelled like comfort. It didn't. Inside, the walls were lined with sepia-toned photos. Women in Sarah stirring pots, holding metal tiffins, smiling with children on their hips. None of the women were Rachel, none were me. A curated kind of nostalgia, anonymous and safe. The chalkboard menu above the register listed dishes in soft pastels. Family dal, Sundays with Grandma's sog, rose pistachio dream bars. Ellie pointed discreetly. Under the laminated glass at the counter, they'd placed recipe excerpts. Decorative, with my handwriting faded into background texture like wallpaper. Not quoted, not credited, just absorbed. We ordered. Ellie got the healing lentil bowl. I ordered the spiced butternut soup. My soup! I knew because it was never traditional. I'd invented it one night when Ellie had a sore throat, and all we had was one squash, a nub of ginger, and a few cloves of garlic. I'd pureed it until silky, added a splash of oat milk for creaminess. I recognized it now, same pale orange, same finish of cumin oil on top. We sat at a small corner table. A young server brought our dishes, smiling brightly. "These are all family recipes," she said proudly, "passed down through generations." Rachel's aunt taught her everything she knows. Ellie didn't flinch. I looked up. "Which aunt?" I asked. The server blinked. "I'm not sure," she said. "But Rachel says it all comes from the women in her family. You can taste the history." Ellie stirred her lentils. "She means my mom," she said flatly. The girl looked startled. "Oh, wow, are you—" "Yes," Ellie said. "She's the one who wrote them. Every single one. I didn't say anything. I took a spoonful of soup. It tasted exactly like I made it. Exactly." Rachel appeared 10 minutes later, called in by a staff member who'd clearly sensed something shift. She walked toward our table with the same gait she always had, like the room belonged to her. "Well," she said, smoothing her blouse. "Didn't expect to see you here." I met her eyes. Clearly. She looked at Ellie, then back to me. "If this is about the recipes—" "It is," I said. Calm, precise. "But not in the way you think." "Ah." She laughed softly, a performative exhale. "Look, I know you're upset. I probably should have asked. But this is for all of us. It's our legacy." "You didn't ask," I said. "And it's not our legacy. It's mine. You didn't cook these. You didn't write them. You didn't even like half of them growing up. You said they were too intense." She shrugged. "People change. I've grown. I've learned to appreciate what we have." "No," I said. "You've learned how to monetize it." The room had quieted. Not completely. Just enough to know others were listening. I lowered my voice, but not my words. "You took pages from my home. You printed them. You used my handwriting as decor. You named dishes after my daughter's childhood illnesses and my father's birthday dinners and made them into branding copy. And you did it all while saying these belong to all of us." She blinked, her face shifting, confused, defensive, calculating. "I can't believe you're doing this here," she said. "I believed in you," I said simply. "Even when you mocked me, when you skipped events, when you said food wasn't real work, I still left the light on for you. and you turned that light into a spotlight for yourself. Rachel crossed her arms. It's food. You don't own food. I own my work, I said. And what you've done isn't just morally wrong, it's legally questionable. Ellie reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder. We've documented everything, she said. Original notebooks, dates, menu overlaps, photographs, statements from people who've seen the notebooks at home. Rachel flushed. You're threatening me? No, I said, I'm informing you. You have 1 week to remove my material. Recipes, language, scans, everything. After that, we move forward legally. She scoffed, but I could see the flicker of panic under her confidence. You'll destroy all of this over pride? No, I said, rising. You already destroyed it. I'm just making sure you don't get to keep the pieces. We left without finishing the food. On the way out, I paused at the window, looking in one last time at the curated past she'd built for my life. And I thought, she doesn't even know the best recipes weren't written down. They lived in moments Ellie on a sick day, my father humming while I stirred a pot, silence shared over warm bread. Rachel would never be able to recreate that, no matter how well she plated it. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a fresh notebook. The cover was blank, no title, just clean, thick pages. I picked up my pen, still stained faintly with turmeric, and wrote the first words slowly. Let's begin again, this time on my terms. The first voicemail came at 6:13 the next morning. I was pouring water into the kettle when the screen lit up. Mom. I let it ring. The second one came before the whistle even sounded. Then Rachel. Then Dad. By the time I'd sipped the first bitter mouthful of coffee, there were 6 missed calls and 3 voicemails. I didn't press play. I already knew the tone. Not apology, not ownership, confusion. Accusation, panic dressed in concern. By 8 a.m., I received the first text. Can we just talk? It was from my mother, followed by, you didn't have to ambush your sister like that. Ambush. As if quietly asking for my work to stop being exploited was an act of war, I turned off the notifications. But the messages didn't stop. They came in waves, Dad asking what had gotten into me, Rachel accusing me of trying to ruin her, Mom insisting that family doesn't take each other to court. Ellie saw my expression as I scrolled. Want me to block them for a while? She offered. I shook my head. Number. Let them speak. I want to see how far they'll go. At noon, Rachel's tone shifted. Let's compromise. Maybe a credit on the menu? I didn't reply. At 1:17, another message. Fine. We'll remove the pages. Just don't go public. Still no apology, still no acknowledgement, just preservation mode. I closed my laptop, stood, and began pulling pots from the cupboard. If they were going to spiral, I wasn't going to spiral with them. I had cooking to do. By evening, there were 19 missed calls. Rachel left a voicemail that started with, I'm just so confused, and ended with, you've always been so dramatic. Mom texted to say, whatever's going on, we can fix it. Just don't do anything rash. I wanted to laugh. Rash. Like documenting the theft of my work was irrational. Like protecting myself from being erased was extreme. These weren't pleas for peace. They were attempts to control the narrative. The following day, Ellie came home from campus, holding a manila envelope. Someone left this at the front desk for you, she said. No return address. Inside were copies of receipts, printouts from Rachel's cafe point-of-sale system, a typed letter claiming that the recipes had been developed collaboratively with input from family sources. My name wasn't mentioned once. There was also a draft of a public statement, something vague about misunderstandings and creative overlap. They're trying to build a case, I said quietly. Ellie nodded. A weak one. I forwarded the packet to Ethan. Ethan had been my friend since we were both 20-somethings trying to make rent in a city that ate hope for breakfast. I once fed him for 3 months straight when his scholarship got delayed. Now he was an attorney with a sharp memory and zero tolerance for passive-aggressive gaslighting. He called back the same night. They're bluffing, he said. That draft proves they know they crossed a line. We go forward as planned. I exhaled slowly. Then we go. Oh. The next morning, Ellie and I filed a formal cease and desist, accompanied by a notarized declaration listing the original dates, handwriting samples, and corroborating witness statements mostly from neighbors, church friends, and an old coworker who'd tasted the spiced squash soup back in 2002 when I brought it to a potluck in a thermos, with my name still scrawled on masking tape across the lid. We included photos, emails, and even a voicemail from Rachel last year where she jokingly said, "You should really publish those recipes. I'd steal them if I could." We sent everything. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Dad. His voice cracked. "Why are you doing this to us?" I didn't reply. But later that evening, when Ellie and I were eating takeout on the porch, she played me another voicemail. Rachel, crying. "I didn't think you'd actually do it. You've always been the one who fixed things. You're the good one. You just handle it. That's what you do." She paused. "Do you hate me now?" I didn't hate her. I pitied her. For thinking my silence had been consent. For assuming I would always clean up behind her. For believing that caretaking was the same as permission. I took Ellie's hand. "We're not fixing anything this time," I said. "We're letting it fall." That night, I turned off my phone. We lit a candle in the living room, ate dessert on the couch, and watched a rerun of a show we both liked. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't check my email. I didn't scroll through voicemails. I didn't calculate how many recipes had been stolen. I just breathed, slowly, fully. Outside, the sky was bruising into dusk, and for once, the quiet didn't feel like the edge of a storm. It felt like the beginning of something clean. 3 days later, they tried one last time. It started with an invitation, hand-delivered by courier, no return address. A pale cream envelope with my full name, in handwriting that wasn't my mother's or Rachel's. Inside was a card, "Family brunch. Let's put this behind us. Sunday at noon." The location was Rachel's house. No apology, no explanation, just that single sentence, neat and hollow. Ellie glanced at the invitation when I laid it on the kitchen counter. "You're not going, right?" she asked. I didn't answer. Not at first. I picked up the envelope, studied it again, and felt nothing. Not anger, not even grief. Just a familiar ache. The kind that reminds you, this isn't the first betrayal, it's just the most recent. I showed up on Sunday. Not because I expected resolution, but because I wanted clarity. Ellie came with me, not to speak, just to be there. A quiet witness. Rachel's house was decked out like always overdone charcuterie boards, mismatched rustic dinnerware, soft jazz playing like it was all accidental. My parents were already seated when we arrived. My mother stood first. "You came," she said, like that alone was enough. I gave her a nod. Briefly, we sat. No one acknowledged the letter. No one said sorry. My father cleared his throat and launched into a story about his knee surgery as if nothing had happened. My mother passed Ellie a plate of cut fruit like it was a peace offering. Rachel poured orange juice. "I wanted us all together," she said, "before things go any further." I looked at her then, really looked. She seemed smaller. Not physically, just less certain. Her posture stiff with effort. "What exactly do you think is going further?" I asked. She paused. "You filed a legal threat." "I filed a boundary," I said. "One that should have never needed lawyers in the first place." Rachel's eyes flashed just for a second. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." "You didn't think I'd defend my work?" I asked. "Or you didn't think I mattered enough to need defending?" Silence fell like dust. My mother sighed, that old theatrical kind she used when grocery clerks didn't bag her produce right. "We just want peace," she said. "We're family. Isn't that more important than a few recipes?" I placed my fork down. "It's not just recipes, it's everything behind them. Years of work, of feeding people who never once asked how I was doing. You didn't just take my food, you erased me from it." My father finally looked up. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Ellie laughed quietly. Not loud, just one exhale that made the room tilt. "You told everyone she gave you permission," she said. "You lied." Rachel's voice hardened. "I was trying to honor her. I didn't think she wanted the attention." "You didn't ask," Ellie replied. "You never ask. You just take." I didn't speak. I let Ellie say what I couldn't anymore. Rachel folded her napkin slowly. "What do you want then? A cut of the profits? A credit on the wall?" Ellie looked at me. I shook my head. "I want you out of it," I said. "Remove my handwriting, my words, my dishes, all of it." My mother opened her mouth. "But that's not fair. Rachel built something beautiful." I turned to her, calm as ever. "With stolen wood." The room fell still. No one moved. Outside, a car door slammed and a dog barked in the distance. But inside, it was just us, and decades of avoidance laid bare. "We're not trying to hurt you," my mother whispered. Then stop pretending you didn't, I replied. I stood. Ellie followed. I left the invitation card on the table, folded back into its envelope. As we walked out, no one tried to stop us. Back home, I made tea. Slowly, measured the leaves. Let the water boil just long enough. Ellie watched me, then reached into the cabinet and pulled out the newest notebook, the one with the fresh pages, the one I'd started days ago. Want to write? She asked. I nodded. I picked up my pen and wrote a single line. They invited me back not to make it right, but to make it quiet. Then I underlined it. Once, Ellie smiled. Still want to publish someday? Maybe, I said, but not for them, for the ones who know what it costs to stay silent. She nodded. We didn't say anything more. We didn't need to. The next day, I got a final message. From Rachel. One line. You win. I didn't reply. Because it was never about winning. It was about remembering that what I created had value, even if the people closest to me couldn't see it until it was too late. The days that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't known in years. Not a silence born from avoidance or tension, but a clean, unburdened quiet. My phone stopped buzzing with unsolicited advice, guilt-laced questions, and hollow, how are yous, that never waited for answers. Rachel didn't reach out again. Neither did my parents. I suppose they assumed the damage was done, legal threats filed, business dismantled, relationships frayed beyond repair. But the truth was, the damage had always been there. They just hadn't expected me to name it. I spent that week cleaning the kitchen shelves. Not the performative kind of cleaning, the real kind. I threw away spices I hadn't used in years, wiped down jars I'd kept more out of obligation than purpose. There was something freeing about letting go of ingredients I no longer needed to prove anything. I cooked slowly, without urgency. I browned onions just because I liked the smell. I soaked lentils I didn't need until the next day. I stopped thinking about whether any of it was worth sharing. Ellie noticed. You're different, she said one evening, watching me drizzle tamarind into a pot like it was a sacred act. Lighter. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, it feels like I finally locked a door that's been creaking open for 20 years. She nodded, but her face was still searching. Do you think they'll ever get it? She asked. What they did? I stirred the pot gently. I don't think they want to. Not really. Understanding would mean facing who they let themselves become. Ellie leaned on the counter. I used to wish they would change. Now I just wish they'd stop pretending they didn't hurt you. I looked at her and smiled. They can't pretend anymore. That part is over. The next day I received an envelope. Thick. Cream-colored. This time it came through the mail. No note inside. Just a glossy magazine, culinary features, local chefs, culture columns. In the center spread was Rachel, sitting in a kitchen that no longer existed, holding a teacup like it was a relic. The headline read, A pause, not an ending. I read the first paragraph. It spoke about creative fatigue, public misunderstanding, and the deep emotional cost of family tensions. There was no mention of theft, no mention of whose recipes had built the foundation beneath her. Just a passing reference to shared traditions and the complexity of sisterhood. I closed the magazine, set it aside, and laughed. That night, I made coconut rice, Ellie's favorite. While it steamed, I pulled out the new journal and wrote a fresh recipe. I titled it Quiet Victory, not out of pettiness, but truth. There was a kind of triumph in surviving betrayal without bitterness, in choosing not to shrink, in rebuilding not from rage, but from clarity. I added a note beside the ingredients. Best served after reclaiming your name. Later, Ellie and I sat on the porch, bowls in our laps. She asked, Would you ever let her back in? I didn't have to think. I don't hate her, I said, but I don't miss who I was around her either. She nodded, quiet. The porch light flickered on automatically, casting soft light on the notebook beside me. I picked it up and flipped through pages already filled with stories, stains, and little scribbles. It wasn't about starting over, it was about starting truthfully. Finally. In that moment, I understood something I'd never allowed myself to believe before. I didn't need validation. I didn't need their pride or their praise. I had my name, my story, my hands. And they were enough. They always had been. I made tea slowly. Not the kind you brew for guests, not the kind you rush through in between errands. Just ginger, cardamom, a bit of jaggery, and water brought to a rolling boil. I stood at the stove, letting the scent rise and settle into the corners of the kitchen like something permanent. Outside, the wind moved the curtain in soft waves, like breath. I didn't rush. For the first time in a long time, there was no noise I needed to outrun. After pouring the tea into 2 cups, I placed one beside Ellie's notebook on the dining table. She was upstairs, printing out a research paper, her voice faint in the hallway as she spoke to someone on the phone. I could tell from the tone it wasn't serious. Probably a friend. Probably laughter waiting to happen. I took the 2nd cup to the window. Watched the sky turn that quiet shade between gold and gray. The kind of sky that doesn't promise anything, but also doesn't threaten. Just exists. Like peace if you let it. On the side table sat the package I still hadn't opened. Another delivery, no return label again. I already knew it was from Rachel. The last time it had been a book, this time thinner. A letter maybe. A last offering or a plea I never asked for. I didn't touch it. I let it sit untouched on the table, like an apology too late to matter. The tea in my hand warmed my fingers, and I breathed. Later, I lit a candle, not because of grief, not even as ritual, just to mark the quiet. I folded a towel, washed 2 bowls, replaced the dish towel on the oven handle. Tiny things, no audience, no need to be seen. Just care, in motion. A form of presence I had once wasted on people who couldn't receive it. When the mail came the next morning, there was a wedding invitation tucked between a catalog and a flyer. A distant cousin. The envelope was addressed to me alone. No message inside. No note from my mother, or Rachel, or anyone. Just the printed card, the date, the venue. I held it for a moment, read it twice, then placed it on the counter without reaction. I didn't respond. I didn't throw it away either. I let it sit for a while, then I dropped it in the recycling bin. Afterward, I returned to my journal, the dark blue one. I opened to a fresh page and began writing not a recipe, but a memory. The first time I'd ever been alone in a kitchen. The first sound of oil meeting cumin. The feeling of control. The sense of power in feeding yourself. I wrote slowly, letting every sentence land. There was no rush to preserve, no fear it might be taken. It was mine. It would stay mine. That night, Ellie made dinner. Just pasta, salad, nothing complicated. But she moved around the kitchen like someone who'd watched closely for years. She used the wooden spoon I always preferred. She wiped the counter the way I did twice, once dry, once damp. She didn't say she was copying me. She didn't have to. I felt it in the way she moved, like lineage, without words. After dinner, she handed me a sheet of paper, a printout. "Just something I've been working on," she said, almost shyly. I read it. It was a proposal for a small local project. A community cookbook. Not glossy, not branded. Just stories and recipes from women who'd never been published, never been asked. I looked up. "You're leading this?" She nodded. "I learned from the best." I didn't cry. I just folded the paper, placed it in my notebook, and said, "Let me know how I can help." She smiled. "Already started a section for you." Later, when the house had gone quiet again, I sat with my hands folded, palms warm from the last mug of tea. I looked around the kitchen not for mess, not for memory, just to see what remained. The light, the tools, the silence. They thought I was lost, but I was never theirs to lose.